It's been 2 months since Russia began its airstrike campaign in support of the Syrian regime, and now we know the number of casualties. We have information that points out to more than 1,500 killed in this airstrike campaign, Nick. And this is according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a British-based organization that is tracking the casualties of the conflict. And the numbers support the main critique that everyone has against Russia in this operation, that is, they are targeting rebels more than they are targeting ISIS. And we have the numbers. They are incredibly balanced, if you will. 485 civilians. A third of these casualties are civilians, including children and women. More than 200 children and women that died in this bombing. But that's more than the 419 ISIS militants that they already killed with this airstrike. So we know that they haven't been very effective, but also they have 598 Kurdish fighters, mainly members of Al-Qaeda al-Nusra Front. So we know that it's 1/3 ISIS, more than 1/3 rebels, and 1/3 casualties, civilian casualties. Are they being effective?
Well, with numbers like that, even if they killed 10,000 ISIS fighters and you have, half a thousand civilians dead, can you really say you're doing your job when you have that high of a casualty, if we're talking about civilians? It's extremely sad. Again, though, we have to understand, though, whether they're targeting ISIS, whether they're targeting al-Nusra Front, the Free Syrian Army, all of these fighters are embedded in very dense civilian populated areas, so it doesn't matter who they're targeting. As long as they're indiscriminately bombing, they're going to kill civilians. And I'm not just talking about the Russians. I'm talking about the Americans and everyone in the U.S.-led coalition and the Russians as well. Let's be honest. This organization is quick to throw out these numbers, but good luck prying, the numbers out of civilians dead from a U.S. airstrike, for example. That might be a little bit harder to find.
The observatory has a number of 250,000 killed in Syria alone since March 2011. And again, these are numbers that they are trying to get together from London. This is a group of refugees that are trying to track the casualties from London, so it's hard. They're relying on activists and informants on the ground, but again, it's difficult. But we see that this Russian campaign in Syria that started in September 30th, now it's clear the results are pretty much overlapping what everybody's saying. Russia is not necessarily fighting ISIS as much as they are helping the Assad regime. Now, with the development of Turkey getting involved by downing the Russian pilot jet, we have a complete shift in the allegiance of the area, because now we have the Russians eyeing the possibility of supporting the Kurds that are the enemy of Turkey, because now Moscow has carried some raids in areas that are Turkmen, which are those that the Turkish government wants to protect. So now we see that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we see this even more discriminate triangle of influence and support. And the only people getting really affected are the civilians that are dying. 1/3 of the people dying in these attacks are civilians, including women and children.
Unfortunately, it's always like that. Now, it's important to point out, though, that Russia, the Turks have always been strong partners, but in regards to the Syrian war, they've never really been on the same side. What's happened up until now, or at least before this jet was down, was they kind of stayed away from each other. They didn't really cross paths. And unfortunately, a lot of people said it was inevitable for that to happen, but it did, unfortunately. And then it kind of just added a new layer to an already extremely complicated situation where so many countries have their own interests and their own agendas that they want to happen. The Russians are saying, well, if we support Assad, that doesn't mean we're not fighting ISIS. Exactly. We're helping Assad fight ISIS. The Americans are saying, well, if you're not fighting ISIS, then you're helping the terrorists. So different views, different things, outcomes that they want. It's just a mess.
It's the complexity of the conflict in the Middle East. And now we know that Russia is, well, we always know that Russia is not the only one carrying these airstrikes. France is carrying airstrikes, and the US have carried 15 different strikes since September 30. These 7 in Iraq, 7 in Syria. And so far, the calculation is that there's over 8 million displaced refugees around the world and within Syria by this conflict.